It's so wonderfully efficient and such skilled screenwriting because what is your first job as a screenwriter at the beginning of the movie? It is, first of all, to draw the reader in. I think of the reader of your script or your novel, if you're writing that, or pull the audience in to the hero and the world you've created and the character, and create identification with that character. And so what do we learn immediately about Erin Brockovich? First of all, remember what the keys to identification are. What are the keys to identification? Sympathy, jeopardy, likability, or again, I agree with Chris, I meant to say, I don't mean a hero needs to be likable, I mean making them a good person is one avenue toward identification. Not necessary, but an option. So a good person, in jeopardy, sympathetic, funny, good at what they do. So what do we see right off the bat? She's in a job interview. How many people have had a fun job interview in your life? No. You immediately feel sorry for someone having to even look for a job. Okay? We will find out she's in jeopardy of starving pretty quick. But just anybody who's looking for a job must be in jeopardy of loss of something because they need something desperately. We feel sorry for her not just because she's having to go through it, but she's just blatantly unqualified for this position. She's just pulling at straws, complimenting his office to try and get, to clutch at some possibility she'll get that. But why is she unqualified? Because she immediately says, well, I had an ex-husband who left, so he left me with the kids, and my kid got sick, so my last job didn't work out, and basically she'd had to devote her life to something else, so she really hasn't been able to be qualified for this. And all that is told in less dialogue than I just spent to explain it. And then, if that's not enough, she goes outside having lost the interview, having not gotten the job, obviously, and she has a parking ticket, and then she grabs the parking ticket and breaks a nail and gets in her car and wham, gets hit by another car, which is big action, which is nice because the one quality of the interview is it's talking heads and it could lull you a bit. And I bet most everybody in the room has seen that scene and still there's always the same reaction. It's like, whoa, I see it, and I've seen this movie dozens of times now, analyzing it and so on, and still it just punches you, it just hits you. And all of that is done in that short period of time. But where it really gets magical is clearly the writer, in this case writers because this interview part was added by Richard LaGravenese and was not in Susanna Grant's original script. The writers know those deeper questions about the character, the longing, the fear, the identity, and so on, and they start to inform everything about that character from the very first moment we see them. When you know your character that well, it's not as if you start the first draft putting this in, but after a few drafts, when you've discovered and your character has revealed herself to you, you can go back to the very beginning scene and see the little bits of business that will inform everything the character does. It's very much like Notorious. All those little bits of business about the drinking and the hiding and all the qualities Chris was bringing out. Those are the magical things because once you know the deeper elements of your character, they're going to be present in every single scene. And one of the things I'll be discussing later that I see this movie very much about, very much a part of the tug-of-war for her is she a mother or is she a career woman? And what is the quality that stands in the way of her being qualified for this job? It's that she had kids that she had to raise. What is it that what does she use first and foremost to try and get the job? Well, I have kids. You'll learn a lot right there. I know about that dipstick for a urine test or whatever she says. So right away, her children and her career loss are laid up on the screen immediately, and that will be woven through this entire movie. And I'll be talking about that a lot as we see those other scenes. Okay.
Well, hard to top that. That is a very good discussion of it. I'll just say that what impressed me was this efficiency and how much information about the character was given out. For instance, not in what she says, but how she says it, that she's inappropriate, that she's dressed inappropriately for an interview, and her attempts are desperate. You can smell the desperation. It's just impressive that the guy was able to, whoever. Some of it is the actors improvising, and this is one of the questions we've been investigating, is how much of this comes out of the script. But this thing at the end was what brought me over into the script. I watched this movie with great resistance. It's a date movie. I did not want to be sitting there, you know, and I had my back up about a number of things, and I went in with a chip on my shoulder.
Identity
and that, yes, and that moment where they efficiently get you out of the scene, end the scene, you know the scene is over, at the moment that he says, look, and she reacts to it, is so courageous. I mean, that takes a certain bravery to do this, and confidence and maturity as a writer, and a lot of confidence in the people you're writing for, that they have to be able to see this. It's risky, this strategy of starting with talking heads, somebody talking to the camera and telling you her backstory while she's not playing cards or, you know, digging in the garden or something, is heresy. This is against all the screenwriting rules. But the guy has the confidence to do it. Someone has the confidence.
One of the things I should say, I had heard that Richard LaGravenese came in and added all the good stuff to the movie. And it just shows you shouldn't believe what you hear in Hollywood, because that is just patently or patently, I never know how to pronounce that word, untrue. I mean, this script was Susanna Grant's script, and he came and added little touches like this interview scene. But her original scene was an introduction of her walking down the street to get the parking ticket, emphasizing the legs that never quit and the mini skirt and the reaction of the guys, which is very much a part of her, but it wasn't full enough. It only presented that one area of identification and that one element, and this brings up those other qualities much more strongly. And I agree about the, we won't talk this much about every clip, it's just that we both love this particular one. I agree about the inappropriate clothing, and that does two things. One is it gets you to feel kind of sorry for her, but at the same time you recognize that is her armor. She is like defiantly inappropriate. It's almost like, fuck you if you can't hire me dressed like this, because this is who I am. And she keeps her distance from people by defiantly taking that role instead of accommodating them in almost any way at the beginning.
And I'd also point out that that strategy may not be working all that well for her. My interpretation of the whole movie is that it's about self-esteem, and that this is a way of saying to the world, fuck you, if you're not going to hire me, really is a way of saying, if you don't hire me, well, it's because you are too judgmental. And it's a defense, as you're saying,
right, exactly,
against a low self-esteem. You know, that she's leading. You know, she wants to get there ahead of you before you can reject her. She's already presenting this "please reject me" appearance.
Yeah, it's sort of like the ogre in Shrek. Yeah. It's like, you know, I'm gonna dominate as an ogre before you have a chance to run away. I'll push you away. Yeah. And that is the way of armor. That is the way with protection. It is always hurting the hero, but the hero thinks it is protecting them. Because it's only protecting them from their fear, it is also hurting them in really realizing who they are and what they long for, because what she longs for is the inkling of it. It's not quite there yet, is in this job interview. Encountering Ed Masry and yelling at him for losing the case, the main reason that we wanted to include that, or that I thought that was a good idea, is again, it's what Chris was saying about pushing people away before they have a chance to reject her. She really doesn't have social skills when it comes to people like this. She's so angry and so defiant and so confrontive that she just distances everybody, and she's not possibly going to get even what she wants in the immediate future, let alone what she might long for. But just as we're discovering those flaws to her, we go to her house, and in the scene where she looks in the cupboard and has the sick baby crying and the neck brace and so on, we start to feel much more sorry for her. It creates more sympathy. We are still in the opening 10% in my structure. We're still setting up the everyday life of this character. This is how things have been going for her. She's broke. She's down to $74. She can't afford food. And then, to show that she's truly a good person, we take her to a restaurant, she feeds her kids with what little money she has, and she says, I don't need food, and she lies to her kids just to protect them from worry about this, because she says, no, I had a big meal to celebrate. And she gives up eating for the sake of her kids having enough food. All of that is primarily, in my mind, laid in to get us to identify so strongly with her that by the time the story gets underway, we have become, as Chris said, we have linked, we've cabled into this character, and we are her. And so far, nothing has happened to move the story. It's all about connecting with her.
Yeah, I would emphasize in this one the flaws that they're presenting in the character. To me, that's a big element in this idea of presenting the limitations in the character's behavior, the things they are making mistakes about that they have to learn and correct just a little bit. And that would be her tendency to go off on people, and when people are doing something nice for her, to throw it back in their face. She does that consistently. She's also rude to various people in the office for no reason. You know, she is a kind of a looksist or sexist about looks, and insults people because they're overweight, things like that, which are unattractive things, but they also give a human dimension to the character. And there seems to be a rule that the more flawed the character is in these ways, the more the audience responds to them. Maybe not likes them, but relates to them and understands, well, this is a person who's got some problems just like I do. Now, I have a little different interpretation of that scene, and I got in trouble for this last time I mentioned it. I said that she's lying to her children, and what I really meant was she's in denial about a lot of things, and it comes out in this way. There was a violent reaction last time I said this. Women in the audience said, "She's being a good mother," you know. And I said, okay. But the point was that she's kidding herself in a lot of areas in her life, and this is her wake-up call. This is the period of time when she's been in this delusion and been coping and getting by somehow, but now all of the cards are out on the table, and it's clear that she's got to wake up and face the reality and not kid herself any longer.
And just to make one last point, I've said it, but this bears repeating, believe me, based on hundreds and hundreds of screenplays. I agree totally with Chris, you want flawed heroes, you want heroes that are complex, you want them that are more human, but it's a matter of emphasis and sequence. You must create the identification first. You've got to get us to want to become that character before you reveal those flaws. We do not see her yelling and screaming in the job interview, because I have read many scripts where the first things we see are that the person is a philanderer or a drunk or mean or not too bright or whatever it might be, instead of first using those identification devices and then saying, but now that you've become this person, you also need to know that this is what they're doing. And oftentimes the identification will also justify the behavior. We start to understand, because of all the hard knocks she's had, why she distances people, why she yells at them, why she would be in denial about what's going on, and so on. So we'll put up with anything once we've identified strongly enough at the beginning.
Yeah, and I do think you have to be careful about these extremes of behavior, because you may not be able to recover. If you put somebody way out on the edge and they do something really outrageous, it may take the whole movie to get the sympathies of the readers back again. Or if you do something outrageous too late in the film, there isn't enough time to win our sympathies back again. So you have to be a little bit conscious about it when you add this level to someone of kind of extreme or outrageous or nasty behavior.
I do want to talk in a very streamlined way about the visible journey for this character, because I said earlier, movies are built first and foremost on the plot and the visible goal. And to me, this is, as with almost all Hollywood movies, very simple. This is a story about a woman who wants to win a lawsuit against PG&E. That's her outer motivation. That's her visible goal. That's the finish line. We are rooting for her to cross, and at the end, she will either win the lawsuit or lose it, and that will resolve the story, and that's it. That's all that this is built on. And the structure is very straightforward and follows precisely that formula that I put up earlier. It is the first 10% we meet her living her everyday life, and then in the scene where she goes and asks for the job with Ed Masry, that's her opportunity. When he says no benefits and she's got the job, it creates a desire to be in a new situation. Then she has to get acclimated to that situation. She learns the ropes in that environment, and she gets this file that seems confusing about this PG&E property sale thing, pro bono case, and then she realizes, wait a minute, they put chromium and the people are getting sick. I want to take this on. And when she decides, I'm going to go after this and see if we can't get them justice or money against PG&E, that occurs at the 25% mark, and that establishes her outer motivation. The halfway mark is when she gets Ed to go along and they all sign the contract. In a scene you'll see, the major setback is when other lawyers are brought in and they screw it all up and then everybody drops the lawsuit and it seems like all is lost. The climax is the final confrontation, not so much with PG&E, it's more symbolized in a scene that I think we're including with the attorneys who have come in to kind of mess it up. And then the aftermath, as you will see, is what happens after she's completed this journey and won the lawsuit. And that's it. I mean, I sort of railroaded through that, but it's really that straightforward. And the main reason I wanted to put this in is to see this first key turning point where she moves into the new situation and is now entering this new place. It's almost geographical. It's gone from the courtroom in her home into Ed Masry's office. Do you have anything about this scene you want to add?
My reaction is to try and plug it into my system. I would say this is some variation on a call to adventure. The reversal here is that she's coming to the mentor and saying, be my mentor, in effect, give me a job. Instead of a more typical situation, the mentor comes to the student and says, come and join the adventure. So this is a little bit different. I also am reminded of a theory about scenes. We haven't talked about the scene per se as a little drama, but I was once told by a story editor that every scene is a business transaction. Every scene is a deal, and many scenes in this movie are literally the working out of some kind of arrangement. And the interesting thing is there was a clause was added to the contract in the or the later draft of the script. At the end, she makes this little plea, don't make me beg. And that's not in the original draft that we read. So it just ended with him saying no benefits. And I think it added a lot to the negotiation to go to that level of, okay, we're fighting and, I'm tough, but I'm also human and please don't, she appeals on the human level, which gives it this whole other inner dimension.
Actually, I'm glad you said that because what it also points out to me, and I agree completely, is how does she get the job? She gets the job. No, she gets the job by becoming vulnerable. She didn't get the job by going in and raising hell like that was what she went in. She went in, give me this job. You getting this fast enough, honey? She is totally obnoxious. I mean, she's just out and out rude. She gets the job when she risks, gets a glimpse. Remember, this is the stage where she's going to get a glimpse of living out of her essence. She gets a glimpse of it by saying, don't make me beg. Wonderful moment for the actress, I think, because in the script, it could have been delivered, hey, don't make me beg, but she does it exactly right, I think. And that is, come on, don't make me beg. It's like, give me a break. And she becomes vulnerable, and that's how she gets a step closer to her destiny. Remember, the tug of war informs every scene. And every time she slips into that connective frame, she's going to get closer to her destiny. It may be scarier for her and harder, but that's why she gets the job.
I was very interested in this section of the story. You could almost pull out all of the scenes that have to do with George and make a little mini movie out of that. And I think it was a good illustration of how the outer journey can go off on its track while some inner journey is being developed, maybe with a completely different cast of characters, because George doesn't have very much to do with the outer journey. He's more about bringing out the possibilities in her, challenging her on her assumptions and on these mistakes, these moral or ethical mistakes that she's been making. So I think it brings out that parallel story very well. I like that scene. I mean, this is really good writing of a male character who's got a little bit of a female side. He's not afraid to show that. He's a good match for her. He comes right back at her. And almost all of that is in the Susanna Grant script, except at the end of the first scene when he falls over. That's not in either script. That must have been an improv on the set. Maybe the director had the idea. Maybe, I suspect, the actor had the idea. And also the ending of the second scene where they go on talking a little bit, and he says, well, it's a good thing you're not interested in me because I sure am not interested in you, to that effect. That's not in any of the scripts. So that must have been improv as well. So I think you have to kind of understand that when you see films, that some of it's in the script and some of it is in the second or third draft of the script, and some of it the director thinks of, and some of it the actors bring to it, and some of it is accident. So, you know, there's a lot of screenwriters involved, a lot of different ways of screenwriting, and then things happen in the editing room that change things yet again. So it's more complex than just what's on the page.
One of the things that interested me, because when we were deciding to do this movie, and I had seen the movie a couple of times then, and I loved the film, I didn't have a real distinct memory of how George really wove into the story. And I know why now, I think, because in going back and looking at it, it is an unusual romance character. Structurally, the things don't happen quite the way they would according to that, you know, very flexible structure and formula that I gave you, notwithstanding. They're going to end up in bed a little sooner than they normally would. But also, as you will see in a later scene, or a couple later scenes, I'll point out, the romance character is usually the reward for the hero becoming fully realized. This is actually a romance character that is kind of pushing her away from going to fully realize herself, that is kind of wanting to keep her inner identity somewhat. And yet, it isn't, he's a source of a certain kind of conflict because he's really having a hard time accepting how she will grow. But in this case, at this point when they're first meeting, I agree with Chris. I love the way they come together here. I also love the way that he is aligned with her children. Because again, and I'm going to make the point in the next two scenes, I'll bring it home because I have evidence right here on the screen for what I'm maintaining, that this is a tug-of-war between career and motherhood. And he is supporting the motherhood part. He's taking care of her kids. He's saying, you don't need this job if it's dangerous. You don't need to do this. You can find another job. There is another quality, too, and it'll come out more clearly, but even here we see he goes beneath her facade. Because the thing that has pushed Ed Masry away, that lost her the case, is that same bullshit of, hey, I've got these numbers, and I bet you're never going to call me, and shut the fuck up, and all of this defiance. And he just finds it kind of charming. He says, hey, come on, that impresses me. In other words, he's not stopped. He's not connecting at the level of her identity, this armor. He goes immediately beneath it and sees there's somebody more there underneath that. And that's what he's responding to, and that is consistent with the way a romance character would work.
In my language of the inner journey, this is a kind of overcoming resistance. He's acting as a mentor, and he's disarming one by one each one of her defenses. I mean, it's really tit for tat. Every time she throws out a reason why, he gives her a reason why she can do what he's asking her to do.
And of course, what you were saying about negotiation. I mean, this is just negotiation exponential. Mm-hmm. It's like that whole game they're playing, and it's almost the cards. It's almost like they're bidding and outbid. No, right. I can't do that. Well, that's not going to impress me. Well, no, I don't need money, and I like kids, and you know. And that struggle for position makes for a much better scene. If on the very simplest level, because emotion grows out of what? Conflict. I mean, if she said, hey, I like the look of you, and he said, hi, I like the look of you, well, do you want to babysit my kids? Well, sure. You'd leave the theater. The reader would stop. That's not much of a movie, you know. You've got to have this. And so that jostling, that jockeying for position, and that built-in negotiation and conflict is what raises the emotion of the scene. One of the things that I love about this scene, and in the pages that everyone has, the pages I think begin a little sooner, where she tells him about getting fired, and she's all distraught. Is that right? Did we include that? Yeah. And she says, I was Mitch Wichita, for fuck's sake, or something. I was fucking Miss Wichita. And she says, and he says, so you're gonna, she said, it doesn't matter. He said, you were working so hard, it doesn't matter, it doesn't make any difference. You can just hear the tug of war there. because she just right within that scene, she's going back and forth. She says, I was Miss Wichita, but it doesn't matter what I do because I'm worthless and I'm just going to be stuck in this place. And she's retreating into that. Nobody can get close to me and nobody will give me credit and nobody appreciates who I am. But what I love most is, and this is what evolved, it's subtly in the scenes, but by the end of the scene, it's much more fully realized, is this is a beautiful statement of longing. And a lot of times, to me, when it comes to thematic moments in a movie, deeper character moments, you don't look for the blatant announcing dialogue or say, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to win. That's terrible. What you look for is the toss-away stuff, the offhanded joke, the little bits of business, because that's where the subconscious, both in the writer and in the characters, is kicking in and revealing something. And when she's standing there with a tiara, and all the trappings of the beauty queen, which is what she was at the beginning, the beauty queen who couldn't make it in the world, she says, and I will bring peace and to the world and end hunger for every man, woman, and child. And you kind of laugh, and it's also kind of sad, but she's telling the truth. That's what her longing is. This is a woman who wants to make a difference in the world. This is somebody, she's interviewing at the beginning for a job, not in an auto mechanic, not in a factory, in a doctor's office. She wants to make a difference in people's lives. That's her longing. And he laughs and he says, how long are you going to be Miss Wichita? He says, well, only a year. By the time I opened so many bridges or grocery stores or whatever it was, I kind of ran out of time to save the world. But again, the humor is covering up the pain of, I want it's kind of like the waterfront, I could have been somebody. I could have been a contender. It's what every character feels in every good movie. I could have been somebody more. And this is where she's saying that. And this is where he is recognizing that deeper thing in her. But then, to me, with the handing of the tiara, there's an interesting juxtaposition of male and female here, of masculine and feminine. He very much plays the feminine role in this movie. He's the one who cares about kids. He takes care of the kids. He says, I'll put this tiara on. And even if it was improv, somebody asked earlier, is it intentional? It's a question that comes up. My belief is it is rarely consciously intentional, and it is always intentional on the part of your subconscious, or what even deeper, the collective unconscious. What somebody was asking, are the myths, were they just to tell stories? I think the conscious people wanted to tell stories, but the collective unconscious that was forming then wanted to say, this is how the world works. And that's what the subconscious of the writer or the actors or the improvising is to bring that up. She is saying, okay, I'll give this to you because I still have to go out and do something more. And we couldn't show every clip, but these romance scenes are juxtaposed with the job. And as her job goes up and down, she just got fired, so she comes back home to her beauty queen role and gets comfort from him. But then, because he loves her for who she is, as he says earlier, you're somebody special to me. He says, I'm nobody. He says, you're something to me. And that's in every version. That's in Susanna Grant's, and it's in Richard LaGravenese, and it's in the scene before the one you just saw. She gets comfort from him, but because he recognizes her truth, it gives her the power to give him the tiara, let him take the feminine role, and go out and do something to save the world. For every man, woman, and child. It's not going to be that. It's going to be for the people of Hinckley. But it's still her way of finding that bigger thing. And because he cares about who she truly is, that's when she can pass the point of no return. And of course, when the two characters make love, even though it's not quite at the 50%, it precedes the moment where they pass the point of no return.
A couple of things. I think you get a glimpse in this scene of her wound. It may not have been specifically this business of Miss Wichita, but somewhere at that time in her life, she went from being an idealist to being a wounded idealist or a cynic. You scratch a cynic and you find a disappointed idealist. So this is kind of a theme in a lot of what we've been doing today. In Notorious, I think Cary Grant probably started out as an idealist, and he had some bad experiences. She started out, Ingrid Bergman started out as an idealist and has been disappointed by the way the world treated her. So the movie is raising the question, can they ever come back from that place, that distant and isolated place they've gone to? and it provides help for them in the form of these characters who bring them along. The other observation is just more general about La Gravenese and his contribution. It seems like what he was doing was not changing much, but punching up the ends of the scenes. More than anything else, he seems to have added little buttons, they call them, at the end of the scene to give it a little joke or extend the idea or deepen the idea of the scene, and that's a very legitimate role in rewriting, is to punch things up and pull out more value and find more levels.
Yeah. I think part of the wound, besides the cynicism, or one of the things that the cynicism grows out of, is the belief, and this is sort of like a typical wound that we all experience, is when we discover the world is not the way we were told it worked when we were young. Right. She thought the world would be her oyster because she was beautiful. And then all that meant was she could open supermarkets. And so, yeah, give her a tiara, yeah, she looks great, and she's still trying to cash in on that chip. And her beauty is not cutting it if what she really wants is to save the world for every man, woman, and child. And I think that's the cynicism. It's, you told me it would be different than this. And look, I was beautiful. I was even Miss Wichita, she says. I was Miss Wichita, for fuck's sake. And it didn't make a difference. And that's the wound, or that's part of this wound you're talking about. The actual midpoint, if you're measuring the time of the movie, is when they have the bundt cake scene, which is, of course, a much greater commitment to the lawsuit. And it does follow fairly soon after the love story. This is a movie where I think the love story does take second tier to the other goal, which is to bring the lawsuit about. But the other reason I wanted to show that scene with the bundt cake is, again, after passing the point of no return, the hero now goes from 1 foot in and 1 foot out on the inner level and is now living out of their essence. And to me, part of her essence is letting go of this armor, this distancing anger, and pushing people away. And when she's with the people in Hinckley, she never does that. It is always about being more vulnerable, asking them in, becoming one of them, and connecting with them. And she's starting to realize more and more that the way to ultimately achieve what I want is not with what I've always done before, which is anger and defiance and, dressing. Even the way she's dressed here is not quite as tarted up, so to speak. She's somewhat nicer dressed and stuff like that. It's all about kind of shifting into this more inviting, connecting person. And that's when they sign. Again, she gets what she wants, and she's starting to learn that. It's part of the arc, is to learn that, hey, if I do this. But of course, once she passes the point of no return, that's when the outside world comes in and starts creating the conflict. And it's that image of the PG&E plant getting more and more ominous, as we've seen it before, but it's starting to be worse and worse, and the guy futilely throwing rocks at it because he's just powerless against that monolith that it doesn't even have a human face. And finally, I wanted to put in the scene with her because it has this wonderful line where she says, if you don't have a uterus and you don't have a breast, are you still a woman? Because this movie to me is about what does it mean to be a woman? Because at first, Erin Brockovich has a different idea of it. She thinks if I'm just beautiful, then I can get what I want. And that's all there is. And then she has kids, but she's totally devoted to them, but she still longs for more. And to me, this is very much a movie that is coming down on the side of that you can do both. That you can have children and you can be committed to them, but there is perhaps a higher calling still. And that is, it doesn't mean that you have to give them every moment, that you can risk their anger because there are other people in greater need with children that are suffering more. And that's when she goes beyond that. And I think that line about, are you still really a woman, is just very pointed for her. This is about her becoming fully defined as a human being, which would be fully defined as a woman. Do you have anything about any of these?
I would only make the point that just notice in the bundt cake scene, that in the previous draft, it was not so specific. It was just, stay and have, Kool-Aid or something. I don't know what the reference was. but this was another LaGravenese button that he put on that scene. And he mentions, they used the word bunt cake 3 times, and that isn't even in the script. That, again, came out in the production. But it's the specificity of it. It's a very good thing that he's doing there to make it that grounded and that specific. And this is another contribution that you can bring to a script, is to make it, find those details that make things alive and relate to our real life. You know, that the bunt cake is so grounded and specific.
There is one other thing we forgot to say about the earlier scene, so I'll rescue it now. The bedroom scene, because it was present in all of the drafts, it was just, again, expanded or molded or whatever. And that is that line, "Don't be too nice to me," okay? What's the exact line? You're reading it, I don't have it in front of me. Yeah, but is it, "Don't be too nice to me"?
It's, yeah.
Yeah, it makes me nervous. Because, again, earlier, first of all, she wasn't being nice at all. And he says, you know, "Is this how you always react to people helping you?" With the card scene. And she says, "I guess I'm out of practice." And he has to tell her how to be receptive. And then a little later, when he's seducing her, when they first go to bed, she says, are you somebody else I'm going to have to get over? You know, am I going to have to survive? Because I don't think I can do it anymore. And she's starting to touch on her fear, and here her fear comes out fully. It's like, look, I've passed the point of no return for you, but I am really laying myself wide open for pain, because I got kicked in the teeth before when I did that. And that's very much a transformative statement of crossing over into that deeper level of commitment and risk.
And I think I just, you know, related to this movie on that level, having seen many women studio executives and writers and people in the business have to make these difficult choices where you're expected to do the impossible, be masterful in all those areas simultaneously, and you just can't. You have to make some choices. So I think that's one reason the movie worked in a general way for a big audience. A lot of people are in this situation.
One of the reasons I pointed that out, too, is just to remember, if you're writing your script, you need those peaks and valleys. You can't have sustained conflict endlessly, or it'll get dull. And certainly stating a long passage without conflict is death, you know, because you've got to have some emotion. And so the tug-of-war I keep coming back to is home versus work, home versus work. After she loses him, she's going to go back and she's going to lose the case, too. It's going to be taken away, and then they're going to screw it all up, and that is, we are at the major setback point here. I also did want to include that scene, besides I love we piped it in from Hinckley part. It's an interesting thing this movie does, not just with a love story, but with the nemesis, because PG&E is kind of this faceless entity. So much so that these are the last time we even see the lawyers from PG&E. And the next real big conflict is with her own legal team, the big gun lawyers that they bring in, and there's another confrontation with them. It's really more about, can she find the strength and courage to risk becoming this new person who will get this respect and still hang on to what she needs to as far as her family is concerned. Now, what we're going to do now is there's 3 scenes left, so we're going to let those play out to the end of the movie. And what I would say look for particularly is, we skipped over a lot of the conspiracy at the end and stuff like that, but notice this scene where she resolves things with her son. And he does recognize that what she's doing for the kids in Hinckley that are like him is important for her to do, and he forgives her, and they become reunited as mother and son. Followed by, really, it takes the place of a climax because there's no big, you know, announcement. It's her telling the woman from Hinckley that we've met about the outcome. So the climax really is us learning and her learning what the outcome of the lawsuit was. The aftermath is the effect of that, the effect it has on George, because he's there, and then the new life that she's going to live now that she's completed it.
It's kind of like an old Hope and Crosby way of ending the movie, where the hero ends up at the end having learned a bunch of lessons, but still going back, reverting to old behavior. And that gets a reaction from the audience. Everyone was laughing, so there must be something effective about that particular approach to ending things, to show that Although people begin to change, they basically stay true to their natures. And I think that's an important principle, that although we talk a lot about character change, the reality is that in the 2 hours of a movie, you barely have time to take the first step. And that's really about as far as most people get. And they, although making some tentative steps towards change, are really staying true to their basic essence, let's say. Her essence is, you know, among other things, that she's always going to be a little touchy and a little bit easy to put into a trap like this.
She doesn't dispense with it, but she does learn to use it better, both her sexuality and her confrontation, because in that later scene, she's confronting the bad guys and says, now that pisses me off, and it persuades them. It's funneled in the right direction rather than blasting it out. And then the jokes about her own sexuality with the other lawyers, when she said, well, since I don't have a brain in my head, then I just had to perform sexual favors. It's sort of parodying how she sees herself as having changed. The one other thing I'd say about the end is just my favorite moment, probably, at least thematically, my favorite moment is when she gives the money. She tells the Hinckley woman who's gone through so much about the money. And she says, I don't even know how much it is. And she says, it's enough for you and your daughters and your daughters' daughters and all they would ever want. And what she is saying is, it unites these two ideas. She has saved the world for every man, woman, and child. It's going down 2 generations, and she's saying this is about your children and your children's children. And it brings the children that she used to use as an armor in the beginning and have woven through this whole thing into the end, where she has put together this longing and this desire to do something with herself and be respected in the career world, to something for children and something that allows her to connect with others. And that is very often the case. In well-written stories, transformation is really more about integration. It's not, I'm going to stop being whoever I was at the beginning and become somebody brand new. It's, I'm going to take what I was at the beginning and I'm going to transform it into something bigger that takes the best of that and lives it fully. There's the inkling of that in every character at the beginning. There's the inkling of the good lawyer in the firm and the inkling of the loving person in Shrek. It's just bringing that forward and integrating it. I'm pretty firm about this leaving things dangling, and that is, surprise, surprise, I'm a fond of periods and exclamation points. If it comes to the visible level, I don't think you want to be ambiguous about the hero, whether the hero wins or loses that visible goal. I think that just pisses an audience off. Well, we waited the whole movie. Did she win that law case or didn't she? I don't think that works. But on the inner level, I think there can be ambiguous elements to that. Did she really change or didn't she? That's a provocative question. The other one is just aggravating, I think.
Yeah, I recently got very involved in editing an independent film, and we found that there was a great satisfaction in landing the punches. That was the way we began to think about these setups and payoffs. That something was floated for the audience early on in the script, and then at some point we wanted to bring that one home and really make it land solidly. And there is a technique to this of calling things back at the right moment and getting that impact out of it without having it seem, you know, too easy or obvious. This is the trick, is getting that balance.
I mean, you just got to trim. You've just got to figure out how to get things rolling. If anything, err on the side of sooner, because Hollywood movies, what happens recently, it's happened before, but is very common now, is the goal is announced before the 25% mark, and the action doesn't begin till then. So in a movie like My Best Friend's Wedding, she says at page 10, I'm going to go to Chicago, I'm going to break up the wedding, and I'm going to win Michael back. And that's her outer motivation. But she gets to Chicago. She doesn't devise her plan for doing it until 25%. She says, oh, I know, I'm going to drive a wedge by getting him to think she's trying to get him to quit his job and some bullshit like that. So announcing the plan even sooner is common. If you take past page 30, I don't think you're going to have your reader anymore with your screenplay.
Yeah, that would be my main reaction, is that you do have to think about your audience for it. And at first, this is someone sitting just reading the script, and they have certain expectations, and they're programmed a certain way. And if you don't fall within the rough range that they're used to, they think there's something wrong. Now, a good script can win you back again after you've, stretched your welcome a little bit, but that's tough. That's tough going, and it's better to just be aware of these things and try to hit the marks more or less. Well, just my last sort of blessing for you all is just to put this in a perspective of what are we as writers. I always like to bring up this idea that we're part of a long tradition of storytellers, and the storytellers really were the shamans or the wise old men and women of the tribes, and they had a job to do, which was to leave their bodies, go out on these vision quests, and bring something back to share with everybody else. Sometimes a song, sometimes a dance, sometimes a story. But that's our function, and it's a very important function. And the world needs your stories more than ever right now, because they have a healing capacity. They have the ability to give people some frame of reference, something to compare their lives to, and maybe some answers in the mysteries of life. So go out there and do your shamanic work, because the world certainly needs it. So blessings on you. Good luck.
I have one last thought to share as well, and that is, in watching Erin Brockovich, this came to me because, as I said, I liked this movie, but I'd never really dug in and picked it apart quite so much as I did in getting ready for this class. And one of the things I've come to realize is that in Hollywood movies, which I think you've probably figured out is kind of where I exist and what my focus is, the good ones really involve character arc and theme and so on, but they really all boil down to very much the same basic arcs for their character. And there are really only three that recur for characters in movies, because I think they recur for all of us, and I think they're particularly American. I think they're particularly strong in this culture. And you'll see them told in different ways and developed in different ways in different movies, but they really consistently occur. And those three things are, first of all, the three arcs, the three transformations that characters need to make. The first is to stand up for who you truly are, regardless of what other people think. Okay? This is certainly what a character like in Stand By Me, he has to fulfill his gift as a writer, regardless of his parents won't accept him if he does. In Working Girl, it's standing up that she is a secretary and not having to pretend to be someone she's not. So it is risking being who you truly are. The second thing is risking connecting with other people, giving yourself to others. It means romantically and that kind of risk, but it means giving to others in the way Shrek needs to do for even those fairy tale creatures, or giving to others in the way in Rain Man he gives to his brother. And the third is to stand up and do what is right, to do the moral, or particularly in Hollywood movies, the honest thing, to stand up for the truth and say, I've got to do this because this is the right thing to do, regardless of the consequences. And in thinking about Erin Brockovich, what was terrific to me is it's about all three. She has to declare, this is who I am. I stand up for this. I am not just a mother, and I am not just a beauty queen. I can be all of this. And then she connects with other people and gets rid of that armor and connects with others and says, I'm going to do this by making myself vulnerable and giving to them. And she does it for the sake of what's right. She does it against not just this corporation, but because this is what justice is. And the reason I'm saying all this is because in thinking about this, in all these qualities which involve risk and integrity and honesty and vulnerability and passion and independence, intimacy sometimes in romantic stories, and sacrifice, there's really only one word that comes to mind that would encompass all of those things, and that is love. And I said earlier that I gravitate to love stories, but what I realized is all great movies are love stories. They're all about characters, and they're all about us finding the power to do that, finding the courage to do that. And what I would say to you is that when you say, I love movies, or I love writing, it is both a privilege but also an obligation. Because if you truly love movies and love stories, you have to risk standing up for who you are and giving that to the world and connecting with others and standing up for what is right with your writing. But here's the payoff. You get to wake up every day and say, I do what I love. And that is a gift that is unsurpassed. And that is certainly what I'd wish for you. And last of all, on behalf of both of us, I would like to say thanks to you for not only being a great group, but for giving us both a chance to obviously do what we love so much. So thank you very much for coming, and good luck. Take care. Thank you. His question was, could I name some other movies that follow this basic structure? So I tend to gravitate toward big popular movies in the assumption that more people have seen them, but let's take Titanic, okay? If you discount the bookend device in Titanic, well, that's going to be a great picture, me with my arms like this, like preacher. Hail, hail, I say, feel the power of screenwriting. If you take a movie like Titanic and just deal with the 1912 story, first 10% we're introduced to her on the dock as she arrives, sort of hidden by all that finery and that huge hat, and I'll talk about that this afternoon and how important that is, and we meet Jack. 10%, the opportunity is, gets on board the Titanic, the whistle blows, and it sets sail. New situation is she's trying to deal with being on this ship, which she hates. She feels trapped. It's like a slave ship. So she's dealing with that. She meets Jack or sees him down below decks where he's in steerage and she's up at the top deck, and so on. Then the change of plans is when he approaches her and she starts falling in love with him. Now, in a love story like that, the change of plans is slightly different because very often in love stories, the hero is not aware that they're going to fall in love with this other character as soon as the audience is. But we know. I mean, you got this rich jerk and you got Leo DiCaprio. I mean, you don't have to be Fellini to figure out who she's going to go with. So she begins to pursue him. He, talks to her. She sees him doing sketches. He saves her life is the key turning point, which begins her falling in love. He goes to that dinner with her and so on. Then, at the midpoint of the movie, after he draws her in the nude, which is really important both symbolically and at the box office, for us guys anyway, they go to down below decks, make love, which is very typical in a love story. Very typical in a love story that at the midpoint, the hero and what I call the romance character either make love for the first time, kiss for the first time, or go on their first date. Because those are the points when the character is stepping up saying, okay, now I'm pursuing you. I'm committed to this. And it certainly creates complications and higher stakes after the couple goes to bed or makes love or has a date or kisses, so they acknowledge that this is it. Right after they make love, she says to him, when we get to America, I want to get off the ship with you. In other words, I'm leaving Cal, that rich guy. So she's making a fuller commitment. Okay, she's putting both feet in as far as Jack, and as soon as she does that, what happens? Hits the iceberg. So now the ship starts sinking, and of course that makes the stakes higher, and it's much more complicated to get to America when the ship is sinking that was supposed to take you there. And then at the 75% mark, she gets on a lifeboat. Now, why is that the major setback? Because we're rooting for her to get off the ship with Jack. And if she goes on the lifeboat and he doesn't, then that can't happen. And then what does she do? She jumps off the lifeboat, takes a real leap of faith, and goes back with him. So now we think, well, great, they're together, but they're going to die. So it seems like all is lost even more. And then the climax of the movie is, of course, when they're in the water and the ship is sunk, and it's going to decide once and for all, does she get to be with Jack forever or not? And then the aftermath is finding out, okay, what happened to her, and then going back to the bookend and resolving that. Her question is, what if you have two heroes, as in Thelma and Louise, or Lethal Weapon, or some other either buddy movie, or sometimes love stories like Pretty Woman, or Sleepless in Seattle have two heroes. Structure is the same. Now, they may have different goals. In Thelma and Louise, they're absolutely united. In a love story, they might start out and have separate goals, but the goal they have in common is to end up together. And the structure follows that, and the other as well. If you do Sleepless, which I don't want to go through in detail, but if you just go home and look at that, you'll see that her story about finding Sam follows exactly the same structure and has the turning points right next to his structure for his goal, which is to take Victoria away to the Holiday Inn and get laid, which is really his outer motivation in that movie. Okay? So two heroes doesn't really make any difference to structure. They just have to coincide. Yes? Okay. His question is, he always has difficulty as a writer at the progress stage. The other thing you ask about, the OW, that's for Chris, is going to discuss that. That's for his structural pattern, so he'll get to that and answer those after the break. When it comes to the stage of structure, to the stage of progress, what I would suggest is, the key is, what plan has the hero formulated to achieve that goal? And what are the obstacles that are obviously inherent in wanting that goal, as opposed to the obstacles that will come later, which is when the outside world catches on to what the hero wants and conspires against her. And I will explain that more later. But for the stage of progress, the key is the hero formulates a plan. That plan has to have immediate obstacles inherent in achieving this goal. I would suggest that if you're having trouble at that or any other stage, the most likely culprit, the most likely difficulty is not in that stage. It's back with your outer motivation. My rule of thumb is, when you're in trouble, all roads lead to the hero's outer motivation. Make sure you have a visible finish line. If I say, what's your movie about, and you say it's about a character who wants to be accepted, you haven't got a movie yet. You don't have a visible finish line to cross. You don't have a story about escaping or stopping or retrieving or winning. Or some, it's not every movie falls into that, but something similar. So first go back and make sure you've got an outer motivation. Then ask yourself, what makes that inherently impossible to achieve? And if it's inherently impossible, the things that make it impossible are going to bump up against the hero immediately as soon as the commitment is made at the 25% mark.
I would say, too, that there's a book outside, Myth in the Movies, which was written by a colleague of mine, and Stuart Wojtyla took 50 movies and ran them through this sort of meat grinder of the hero's journey, and gives you good examples for all these things. But elixirs can be, again, very poetic, very open and free sort of interpretation of things. The elixir, let's say, in Titanic, you could look at it this way, that the jewel is this sort of MacGuffin or this object that they've channeled a lot of ideas through. And at the end of the story, she throws it away. Heartbreaking moment for me. I wanted to dive off the edge and get that thing, you know. But, it was saying that the physical elixir is not important. And that was her sacrifice at that moment. The real elixir was having had a good relationship with Jack, brief though it was, and having incorporated all those things. She kind of embodied him. So she bore away with her this elixir that ran her whole life. The whole rest of her life was that, and she's still radiating it, and we're still getting some of that glow from her understanding. So that was one example of an elixir. Many times it's love, or it may just be a good story to tell. That is a great elixir right there. Just coming back from a journey to some strange place and having a tale or two to tell about it is plenty of elixir, because it gives people ideas about how to live their own lives. The deeper you get into the story, the less precise these numbers become. The 75% is a little harder to pin down than the 10%, because it does get, you're dealing with many levels. But it may be that the climax of that act is a big decision, a choice that the hero has to make. We haven't talked much about choices, but that's a big element in this as well. The choice to stay in the special world, for example. Many heroes want to stay there. It's like, hey, I've lived all my life in the ordinary world. I don't want to go back, but I have to because I have to save the dog, or I have to bring the treasure back and share, or we have to bring the medicine back, or whatever is needed there. So some kind of choice has to be made there. Are you going to slide back into your old behavior, or are you going to really commit to implementing this change in your life? Yeah, that's an interesting question. What if you want to start in the special world? And that brings up something I think should be overlaid on all of this. You know, what really determines the structure is the needs of your story, whether people change or not. You know, we like to talk about character change, but whether they change or not depends on the story, because maybe you're telling a story about a character who doesn't ever change. Remains of the Day is like that. You know, the character, that's the tragedy. He doesn't change. He's the same at the beginning and the end, although he has lots of opportunities to change. Now, your question is about what a sort of untypical situation where maybe you want to begin in the special world. The ordinary world is still implied in that, you know, and we may go back and visit it later. This one structure you could be using here is the short story structure. Because short stories are so short, they like to start them in the middle or almost near the end, or, you know, at some point very deep into the story. And then we catch up. Later we'll come back and review that, or there'll be a flashback, you know, or there are structures where you begin at the end with the death of the hero, and then we come back and the rest of the story explains how we got there, maybe following it in linear sequence or maybe jumping around. There are many, many possibilities here, and I'm glad you asked the question, because it points out that the needs of the story dictate everything, really. And so if your story is one about fragmentation, then maybe you don't want to follow this linear pattern. Or if it's about the importance of this special world, and the ordinary world is like an afterthought. It's like, we do have to address it. We'll do one scene or one speech that talks about that, but basically it's all happening here. That's okay. That just depends on the needs of your story.
Well, I don't know if this will answer it or not, but first of all, inner conflict and outer conflict are not moments. They are ongoing. The outer conflict is the package of obstacles that the hero must go through that increase in the course of the film and that have an up and down quality. The inner conflict is the continual and repeated tug of war between essence and identity. So there isn't one moment. What I would look at first for those peak moments is the turning points I gave you and the way they correspond both inner and outer. But what I would say is let go of the concern right at the moment about inner and stay with the outer until you have the structure worked out for your plot. And then let the inner story emerge. Again, I talk so much in absolutes and formulas and stuff, you may conclude that I'm thinking you've got to go home and come up with the inner story and start plugging it in. I don't think that's wise. I think what's wise is to go come up with either a character you want to explore or a story you want to tell and work that out. and let the inner stuff emerge. I just finished collaborating on a screenplay, and we had worked on that for a year before we finally realized, God, look at this. At its core, this is a story about the search for the truth. We didn't start out saying, let's do a movie about the search for the truth. We just wanted to tell a good story that grew out of a real event, and then gradually it emerged from our unconscious, or it'll emerge from yours. It's both. I'll tell you why. If you're in most love stories and all romantic comedies, there's another element, and that is deception. In a romantic comedy, a hero at the 25% mark has a goal, often a career goal, like in Working Girl or Tootsie, has a goal to achieve some visible accomplishment. To achieve that goal, they must become involved with a character who they start to fall in love with. But here's the catch. To achieve the goal, they believe they have to lie about something. So they have to pretend to be a man, or pretend to be a woman, or pretend to be a broker instead of a secretary and Working Girl, or pretend that they aren't in love and that they're already engaged in My Best Friend's Wedding, to hide what they truly feel or who they truly are. So they end up lying to and deceiving their romance character. So what happens is, at the end of Act 2, traditionally, or generally speaking in romantic comedies, and a lot of love stories as well, what happens at the end of Act 2 is the truth comes out. They were probably just about to tell the truth. Oh, I've got to tell the truth. Can't quite bring themselves to because they're scared, of exposure. And the romance character or everybody else finds out. So the romance character thinks that he was being lied to about the hero loving him, as well as about the job. So in Working Girl, which is the classic formulaic romantic comedy, she loses her job and she loses Jack. Yeah, it's like all these other terms, I have my own definition. My definition of theme is just some universal statement about how we should live our lives. So what it does is it takes the character arc and whatever the character had to learn and makes it universal. So the theme of Shrek is to be fully evolved or fully individuated, we must stand up for who we truly are, and we must connect and be willing to risk connecting to other people. Or the theme of the firm is to be the best person you can be, you must stand up for what's right, not just go after wealth and affluence or creature comforts. You see? So that's the connection. My belief is there is none, no best time. Sometimes it's the prologue. We see injury done. We see a wounding experience for the hero. Sometimes it's quite early, as in The Firm. It's revealed pretty early about the trailer park. Sometimes it's quite a bit later, as in Shrek, where he says it's other people who'd run away, although we've already gotten a sense of that. Sometimes it's at the end. In Good Will Hunting, great example of character arc, his wound is when he was a kid, he got the shit beat out of him on basically a daily basis, and he thought it was his fault. So he's so protected, he won't even let anybody see that he's a math genius. And it takes the whole movie for Robin Williams to get him to say, this is what happened, but it's not my fault. And it's right, that's the nanosecond before his arc is completed, because that's when he gets the courage to go after Skylar, which is his outer motivation in that movie. I think you might be. His question is, I'm starting wanting to write a story about a search for truth, and then I'm trying to come up with a plot that does that. I don't know I can't say it's impossible. It wouldn't work for me. I think that there are two probably more productive starting points. One is with goal, okay? In other words, start with a goal that you just think would be exciting or funny or romantic or sexy or whatever, and then figure out what character would be best to put in that story and let the character emerge, or start with character. start saying, I want to write a story. If you started by saying, I want to write a story about someone who's completely protected, what's a situation where someone might be and let something grow out of that, I think starting with character or starting with objective is going to be more productive than starting with theme, because you've got such a huge universal basket to choose from, because there's so few basic themes to explore, that I don't think it's going to get you very far. So I would start with either character or goal.